animated explanation of David and Goliath, underdogs, misfits, and the art of battling giants, written by Malcolm Gladwell. In this book, Gladwell's central argument is that what we often perceive as disadvantages can actually be sources of strength, while advantages can lead to complacency and weakness. In the introduction, Gladwell challenges the reader's understanding of the biblical story of David and Goliath. He argues that Goliath, despite being larger and more heavily armed, was actually at a disadvantage due to his lack of mobility and vulnerability to long-range attacks. Gladwell suggests that we often misunderstand the nature of power and disadvantage, and that what we perceive as disadvantages can actually be sources of strength. Gladwell even relates the fight of David and Goliath to a blind, disabled man, Goliath, to a skilled marksman with a rifle, David, who would obviously win that fight. Gladwell explains how giants are not what we think they are. The same qualities that appear to give them strength are often the sources of great weakness. Ultimately, don't assume that power and advantage always come in the form of size, strength, or wealth. In Chapter 1, Gladwell tells the story of Vivek Ranadive, an Indian immigrant who became a successful Silicon Valley CEO. Ranadive's experience coaching his daughter's basketball team, which consisted of smaller and less skilled players, inspired him to develop a strategy that relied on speed and precision rather than size and strength. Gladwell argues that Ranadive's unconventional approach to basketball coaching is an example of how underdogs can win by playing to their strengths and exploiting the weaknesses of their opponents. His team was not playing the same game as everyone else. They were playing a new game, one that Ranadive had invented, one that Ranadive had imagined, one that was perfectly tailored to his team's unique strengths. To succeed as an underdog, it's important to identify and play to your strengths. Don't try to compete with your opponent on their terms. Find a way to play a different game. Chapter 2 tells the story of Teresa DeBrito, a woman who lost her daughter to leukemia. DeBrito's experience of grief and loss led her to become an advocate for pediatric cancer research and to develop a new treatment protocol that has saved countless lives. Gladwell argues that some disadvantages can be blessings in disguise. There is a set of advantages that have to do with material resources, and there is a set that have to do with the absence of material resources. And the reason underdogs win as often as they do is that the latter is sometimes every bit the equal of the former. Don't assume that disadvantage is always a negative thing. Adversity can inspire innovation and creativity, and can lead to unexpected sources of strength. In Chapter 3, Gladwell explores the phenomenon of relative deprivation, which occurs when individuals feel deprived or disadvantaged in comparison to others in their social group. This concept is relatively similar to imposter syndrome. He uses the example of Caroline Sachs, a high-achieving student who struggles to adjust to life at an Ivy League university. Sachs' story highlights the idea that success is relative, and that what we perceive as advantages can lead to a sense of entitlement and complacency. The sense of feeling deprived is relative. It depends on the context we find ourselves in. Don't take your advantages for granted. What you perceive as an advantage may be a source of complacency and weakness, and what you perceive as a disadvantage may be a source of motivation. For example, having limited resources can force a company to be more creative, efficient, and nimble. This can be an advantage because the company can focus on its core strengths and respond quickly to changes in the market. On the other hand, having a lot of money can provide a company with advantages such as investing in new technology and attracting talented employees. However, if the company becomes complacent or wasteful with its spending, it may lose its competitive edge and struggle to adapt to changes in the market. Overall, don't take advantages for granted. Analyze your situation and see if you can use your disadvantages for good, while at the same time, not overlooking your current advantages. Chapter 4 tells the story of David Boies, a successful trial lawyer who overcame dyslexia to achieve great success. Gladwell argues that what we perceive as disadvantages can often be strengths in disguise. Boies' dyslexia, for example, allowed him to develop exceptional verbal and analytical skills. The act of facing and overcoming adversity can result in unexpected sources of strength. Don't let perceived disadvantages hold you back. Your weakness may actually be a source of strength and can lead to unexpected success. Chapter 5 tells the story of Emil J. Freireich, a physician who revolutionized the treatment of childhood leukemia. Freireich's unconventional approach to medicine, which involved using aggressive chemotherapy treatments, was initially met with resistance and skepticism from his colleagues. Gladwell argues that sometimes it takes an outsider to challenge the status quo. Disobedience is the true foundation of liberty. The obedient must be slaves. Sometimes it takes another perspective, someone who is not bound by convention, to effect real change. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo and think outside the box like Jay. Chapter 6 tells the story of Wyatt Walker, a civil rights activist who worked alongside Martin Luther King Jr. Gladwell argues that sometimes the most effective form of protest is not direct confrontation, but rather a strategy of cultural bluffing, which involves adopting the trappings of power and privilege in order to challenge and undermine the status quo. Cultural bluffing is a powerful tool in which one dresses or acts in a way that gives the impression of being powerful or important, in order to gain respect and be taken seriously. This can be useful in situations where an individual or group is seeking to challenge the established order, but lacks the formal power or authority to do so directly. By presenting themselves as powerful and important, they can force those in power to take notice and engage with them on their own terms. Chapter 7 tells the story of Rosemary Lawler, a mother who lost her daughter to a violent crime. Lawler's experience of grief and loss led her to become an advocate for victims' rights and to push for reforms in the criminal justice system. Gladwell argues that sometimes it takes a personal connection to a social issue to inspire real change. Don't be afraid to use your personal experience to advocate for change. Our own lives are the best source of motivation for action. Chapter 8 recounts the story of Wilma Dirksen, a mother who also experienced the devastating loss of her daughter due to a violent crime. In the face of grief and sorrow, Dirksen found a new purpose and began advocating for restorative justice, a process that seeks to repair harm rather than simply punish wrongdoing. Gladwell argues that sometimes the most effective form of justice is not punitive, but rather restorative. Forgiveness is not a passive process. It is not forgetting. It is not condoning. It is a deliberate decision to let go of feelings of resentment or vengeance. Restorative justice is often more powerful and effective than punitive methods. Chapter 9 tells the story of André Trocmé, a pastor who led a community of French Huguenots in sheltering Jews from the Nazis during World War II. Gladwell argues that sometimes the most effective form of resistance is not violent resistance, but rather a strategy of nonviolent resistance, which involves using peaceful means to challenge and undermine the status quo. The question is not whether one should use violence in resistance. The question is whether the use of violence will be effective in achieving the desired end. Nonviolent measures of resistance can bring about more change in the status quo due to the unconventional nature of such measures. It is also a test of one's own willpower and can be used to determine one's own tenacity and perseverance. Overall, this book examines the concept of power and how it is perceived and wielded in society. Gladwell argues that our assumptions about power and advantage are often incorrect, and that underdogs can actually have unexpected sources of strength. One of the main ideas is that adversity can be a source of strength. Gladwell argues that people who face adversity are often forced to develop skills and qualities that would not have been necessary in a more favorable environment. These skills can give them an advantage in unexpected ways. Gladwell also discusses the concept of desirable difficulties, which refers to challenges that may seem like a disadvantage at first, but actually help individuals develop resilience and problem-solving skills. Another key idea is the concept of the inverted U-curve, which suggests that there is a point at which too much of a good thing can become a bad thing. Gladwell argues that this principle applies to many aspects of life, including education, wealth, and power. For example, he suggests that there may be a point at which having too much money can actually decrease happiness, or that there may be a level of class size in which students learn best. Gladwell also challenges the idea that power and advantage are always beneficial. He argues that being at the top can actually be isolating and can lead to a sense of entitlement and arrogance. Additionally, he discusses the concept of cultural bluffing, which involves adopting the trappings of power and privilege in order to challenge and undermine the status quo. Ultimately, use the lessons in this book to encourage yourself to challenge your assumptions about power and advantage, and to look for unexpected sources of strength in adversity. You should be willing to challenge the status quo and think outside the box. Thank you for listening. We hope you liked this video, and if you did, please consider subscribing. Remember to empower your mind, elevate your life, and shift to infinity.